I think as a human race, we've always wanted to make things better, don't you think? Like we've always wanted better. And so the internet is just another way of making our lives easier and better and more fulfilling. So that to me is the essence of design. So, you know, when we were walking barefoot and we realised that there were things on the ground, we, you know, created shoes. And now there's an internet so that we connect better and we talk to each other better. So I think this kind of way in which we've tried to make things better is occurring now. But the problem is that we've got this unrivaled, limitless access to information at our fingertips, and that's where the problem occurs. So we've got this computer that's more powerful than NASA's computers in the 60s sitting in our pocket. And the way that they've been created is to, well, we live in a neoliberalist society, so it's created to reinforce and enforce and create desire. So it's creating a sort of an addictive personality. And we're becoming more technologically dominated. And this idea that we think that we're free, where freedom is, well, we're not actually free at all with these things in our pockets. Now, I'm not anti-technology because I actually think that this is a remarkable time that we live in. And the problem is there's too much noise and there's too much fragmentation and there's little time for contemplation. And my argument, I suppose, is we then feel this incredible need to conform, and we are constantly erring towards this kind of scandal. What I mean by that is we have like an outrageous, instead of just letting things sit, we tend to get involved in outrage. So we'll shoot off an email, we'll sort of create storms in teacups because we can now, because it's accessible. Whereas in the old days, you know, you might write a letter to the editor or to your local member. So I suppose what's happening there is so the fundamental way in which we live in the world is changing because of that. So it's much more attention grabbing, but things tend to be brewing and still in a teacup, and then they disappear and into this digital quagmire. So nothing necessarily changes, if that makes sense. So it doesn't give us time for contemplation. And for me, contemplation is where ideas, where creativity, where originality, and even ideas of the unusual appear when you have time. You've got time to contemplate. And that's when the best things emerge. The best of everything emerges when you have time to contemplate. I think, sure, agility is good, and so can moving fast. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And sometimes it's essential that we move fast. But true original ideas need time to emerge. Eureka moments don't necessarily come, you know, they say, oh, I'll have an idea in the bath. Often the ideas in the bath or in the shower that you get from letting things sit and contemplate. They appear because the unconscious is working. And when you're in the shower, there's a space between, if you like. So that's when when there's a space between, that's when the eureka moments occur. So that's why moving fast, you give yourself no space for those moments. But it's also more complex than that, because we are living in this very present time. Everything's we're under great pressure, as we talked about before, to perform faster and achieve more. And it's not society that just puts pressure on ourselves. We actually put a lot of pressure on ourselves, and it's this idea that we are part of good vibes and positivity, and it's part of what Byung-Chul Han, the Korean German philosopher, talks about, this idea of the achievement society, that we're always trying to achieve, where we become entrepreneurs of ourselves. So we're no longer subjects in the old way of in the world where it was ruled by a society, and we knew where our positions were, whether it's like the governments, we'd know our position. Nowadays, we're not controlled by necessarily a ruling force. We're masters of our own technology, which is both good and bad. But it's leading us to this idea of compulsive achieving, and this idea of we're always having to optimise ourselves, be better, be better, be better, which according to Hahn talks about this idea that we're becoming fatigued by that. So we're actually burnt out. And I was listening to a song today in the coffee shop, and it was Neil Young, and he said something like in the song, it's better to burn out than be burnt. But I'm not sure if either are good. You don't want to be burnt out. Burning's not so great either. So Hahn talks about how what's happening is we're getting more and more depressed, and he says it's actually destroying our souls. Well, moving too fast affects any slow long-term planning. It's impossible to let things ripen. And as a creative person, I know that being in the chaos of, sometimes when you do something, you go, I haven't got any answers, and it's really chaotic, and you think, I'm never going to do it, I'm never going to be able to do it. That's part of the process. And as soon as we can be comfortable, and we're not encouraged to live in chaos and live in uncertainty. As a designer, that's part of my day-to-day. I have to sit in funk and be uncertain, because I know that's when the best stuff happens. I kind of liken it to a good stock, a good broth. And I say, well, stock cube can do the trick, but it's often too salty and it's full of MSG. So we get the hit, but it's not the same as when you get great ingredients, you let it simmer, it simmers down into something that's truly, truly delicious. And I think that's where the art of the pause comes in, and that's where the best, most creative people realise that that's what we need in this society more and more. I think we're encouraged to be suspicious. We're told that there's this fear of missing out. Like we're totally fearful all the time. We're fearing imposter syndrome. We're fearing that we're not good enough. It's part of the neoliberalist society that we live in. It's encouraged to, if you don't hurry, you're going to miss out. That's the sort of place that we live in. And there's a great French philosopher, Irigaray, it's pretty much how you pronounce it. She talks about how Westerners have forgotten how to breathe. And I think that that's really interesting. I've been to Japan, and the Japanese are so into their onsens, their hot springs and their baths, and they can spend a whole weekend sitting in a hot bath. And I think Westerners, and there's also the Zen Buddhas, there's a lot of the Eastern philosophies know how to actually contemplate, whereas Western society has lost that. I mean, in the olden days, we used to have Sundays off. That was the day of rest, day of going to church, and even sitting in a church as a Christian, you would sit and contemplate God. Now we don't have Sundays, and we don't have. Well, there's nothing, and God has become what's in our pockets. I often laugh when I see people looking at their phones like we're in reverence to our phones. We're constantly bowing down. So I think that that's why we're suspicious, because there's a whole bunch of things telling us that we're going to miss out. And we're humans, so we forget that the pause is actually where the essence and the best stuff comes from. Yeah. But designing is different from other kinds of activities, not only in outcome, but in the sort of the way we generate those outcomes, right? So, as I said before, designers are actually happy sitting between the gap, I suppose a gap between vision and reality. So there's this gap. So there's the vision, there's the reality, and that's where we thrive as designers. It's sitting in that funk, as I mentioned before, the funk of not knowing. So Western thinking has been about what is, and often what could be. And we've become really good at that. We're great at analytics, we're great at argument. Argument, comes down very strongly in the Western sort of philosophy and psyche. But design is actually different. Design is actually about not knowing and not having answers, and it creates a space. So traditional business hasn't had the time or the appetite for that. It's always head down. It's always same routes. Always what we've done. It's always like, oh, I know, and therefore I do. Whereas design actually creates that middle bit, which is quite bodily. So it's about the gut, it's about intuition, and it's about making. So if you look at the old traditional ways of business, you've got know and then do, and often know is based on case studies that have gone on before. But design tests that, and that's where the strength of design in business helps and creativity helps, because we're testing what's gone on before, using our bodies, if you like, and then we're actually then doing after we've explored that middle bit, which includes things like prototyping and stuff like that. So that's an approach to problem solving. But I think also the lovely thing about design is that more and more designers stepping into this idea of not problem solving. We're not just going in and going, here's a problem, but we're actually looking at what can be or what could be. So this idea of looking out at and future forecasting, using design as a way of, okay, well, this is what we're all doing and this is what's happening, we're all stressed. How do we want our society to be? So design is now becoming much more vital, that way of thinking, for future-proofing our lives. While I'm a designer, I still think there's different, I love design, so I'm always going to say it's fabulous, we need it everywhere. But I think there's different types of doing and thinking, and it depends on the problem. So design thinking is what could be, and it's for kind of visionary sort of stuff. So it's, whereas sometimes you just have to you're in decision mode. You have to decide, okay, there's this or there's this. There's no, I was thinking about Obama. I read somewhere that Obama only had, because he had so many choices to make every day, he used to only have two coloured suits, a blue and a black one. Now, whether this could be a myth, but an urban myth, but the idea is, of course, it just meant he could decide without thinking. So sometimes those sorts of decision making is important to simplify ourselves. So I suppose the answer is that it's not better or worse. They're just different modes of thinking, and I think business needs to encompass both. The old traditional ways of business aren't working anymore when we're seeing that time and time again. I think some of the best, some of the most interesting accountants are creative people. I mean, the thing about design is that people think design is this fluffy thing that, it's all about wallpaper, but it's actually more than that. It's about helping people make decisions, and it's actually doing and making in the middle. So I think all industries can benefit from using design in the industry. It's riskier. It often takes a bit more time. So often, what I find when I work in businesses, they go, "Oh, we haven't got time," or it's all too hard. But the best, designers. I also see myself as a bit of a design therapist. I mean, therapy is important to be a designer because you have to be a people person and have to have this notion of empathy and understanding other. And that's what makes a really good designer as well. And all of those great design, the imaginative, the empathetic, the people skills, that's to me what makes good business. And people forget that. They think it's the fluffy stuff, but good business is all about design. Yeah. So is that question about if it ain't broken, you don't need to fix it, maybe? Because of the nature of design, which I'd mentioned before, is this idea of bridging gap between vision and reality. we actually do need to continually future-proof what's going on. So just because we think it's not busted, it could be. So it's kind of like, oh, here we are now, but where are we going to be in the future? And I think that's where design gets really, really interesting. And often I see traditional business bereft of ideas, and success is kind of measured on shareholder success. You know, that is considered wealth, and success is if it's money in the pockets of... and they're not interested so much in designful, whether or not that's a word, designful innovation and imagination. And I think we're needing that more and more, because we can't sustain the kind of wealth making and that kind of notion of success. Success is looking after our planet. Success is looking after people around us. Success is making life easier and for all of us, really. And that's, you know, design gives us a chance to be brave enough to solve some of the biggest problems of our time with imagination. And they're all traits, I think, that designers own. Just saying, I think we do. It's a good thing. Resilience is important too. Oh, look, I think it's about resilience in this time, definitely. I think success isn't necessarily about unwavering, you know, pure focus, but about our ability to manage the distractions and be resilient in the world that we live in. I think it's getting harder, and we're, you know, it was there was this kooky performance artist called Penny Arcade, and she did a talk recently at the Wheeler Centre, and she talked about how in the beginning of the century, which we're still in the sort of the kind of turbulent teens, we're kind of equivalent to an 18-year-old at this stage, if you think about it, 19 next year. You know, and that's a tricky time. We're just about to enter uni. You know, it's like that's the beginning of the century. So we don't really know how things are going to play out yet until we become a bit more adult in the century. And I think that it's going to be really interesting to watch what success means in the future for us. And, you know, this idea of managing the distractions around us, we need to practice it now online and offline. I think online's fine, but we just get trapped into this idea of being something or becoming something. And we're always going to find stuff to distract us. I mean, as a kid in the last century, I'm part of that century, we had the television, you know. It was sitting in the room, and, you know, before that there was the radio. There's always going to be something to distract us. And there'll be something else in the future. But the problem is today that we're still suspicious of the pause, and we often see it as unnecessary or self-indulgent. And I think we need to get through that, as opposed to, you know, we need to find that balance and that resilience, because our greatest art and our greatest music and our greatest ideas all belong to a technological breakthrough. It's always about that. It's always the chaos brings actually something new. And that's kind of occurred in this sort of moments of unencumbered contemplation and concentrated attentiveness. This idea of concentrated attentiveness is important. And I suggest that we all do it, and we all have to start doing that more and more if we want to see a positive outcome for our future as humans.